What is going on? And welcome to another special episode of Second Guessing with Stressin. I'm your host, Garrett Williams, aka Houston Stressins. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, lead analyst for the Texans Wire, John Crumpler. John, how are you doing today?
Hey, Garrett, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited
Yeah,
about this.
of course. I appreciate you, making this happen. I know we've been kind of talking about something like this for a while, but I feel like right now is a great time, obviously with the hire of Nick Caley, which we'll get into. But kind of with what I've been doing is, it's kind of been a goal of mine to highlight a lot of people in this Texans community. People we all interact with, for them to get a better chance to know who they're interacting with. So with that being said, if you don't mind kind of just sharing your story and your background of how you've kind of gotten to where you are with what you do with tech and stuff, and then maybe just kind of expand on your career, or people know that you're an intelligent guy, a doctor. So if you want to add any info on that as well.
Yeah, so I guess my football stuff, I did not play in high school. I actually ended up I thought I wanted to do some sports journalism, so started there and carried that into Wake Forest. I covered the football team for the school paper there, and that was kind of my first experience in the press box on that side of things. During the summer of 2018, the Cowboys Wire, their editor Katie Drummond, he put out a search for a new film guy, and that's something I kind of put my toes into the water to with that 2018 quarterback class. That was the Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson class. So I kind of threw my hat in the ring and ended up getting onboarded to Cowboys Wire. And then the year after, I misspelled Ezekiel Elliott's name for like the fourth time. And he was like, "You don't really care about the Dallas Cowboys, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." And I ended up getting transferred over to Texans Wire to write for Mark Lane. And from there, especially with when I graduated college in 2020 and COVID kind of put us all inside for a bit, I really dived into my writing and learning about the sport. And Mark, my editor, gave me a lot of cool opportunities from going to training camp, credentialed, interviewing Andre Johnson, JJ Watt. Just Mark did a lot for me. And then I just kind of kept studying the game, ended up going to the Senior Bowl, kind of working on some draft stuff. And that's how I got to this point with the Texans Wire. This is my sixth year writing for them, I believe.
That's awesome. I mean, and obviously, I can say, kudos to you, and we appreciate all the hard work you do. You do a lot of great work, with your articles and your analysis, film breakdown. I think it's just really cool how you've basically been able to simultaneously pursue a pretty demanding career, but still find time to scratch the itch of something that you're passionate about. So kudos to you for that. Without further ado, I think we'll just dive right into. I think a lot of people are here to get your opinion on the recent hire for Nick Caley as the offensive coordinator of the Houston Texans. I know from following you that he is someone that you had your eyes set on early on. I know you had shared some, podcast info and some insight on that. So, just with that being said, what is your take on the hire? How do you feel about it? What do you expect going forward? And at the end of that, too, just kind of touch on the staff he's building out as well.
A bit of a loaded question there, and I could talk a lot on Nick Caley. I'll try to summarize the best I can, though. So, I mean, he was one of my top guys from the onset for a variety of reasons. I loved his experience. I think 7 years as a tight ends coach, both from the what tangibly that requires with the tight ends, being involved in the run game and the passing game. And then additionally, what that meant as a leader of men, vocal figure, like having been involved in a position group, I wanted someone who could be a little more hands-on in that element. And then you look at these two offensive worlds that he came from, a lot of time with Josh McDaniels and Tom Brady. And then the last 2 years with Sean McVay, and clearly doing well with escalating responsibility from just tight ends coach to passing game coordinator, and getting to really get a front seat at how he and Matthew Stafford work together. So this is a guy who I think is coming from, he's seen how elite quarterbacks and elite offensive coaches operate together. And he's coming from a system that has answers to how modern defenses are attacking offenses, whether that is from these unique exotic blitzes that we see or from rotating coverages on the back end. I really liked that mix of his experiences and his background from there, and kind of especially looking at what the Rams have done, how they consistently optimize the personnel that he has. So looking at the staff that they brought in, I don't think anything's been terribly surprising so far. It was reported that Cole Popovich was likely to be elevated from assistant offensive line coach to the head offensive line coach. And I was doing some film study this morning. You guys can check it out on Twitter at John Crumpler, MD, about that 2020 Patriots run game. And 2020, 2021, those were top 10 run games in the NFL for the New England Patriots. And it is violent downhill gap running. And not coincidentally, one, the league is going there as defenses get smaller on the front end. And two, the Texans offensive line, the guys that we have right now, you can't remake the whole room in one off season. They are a lot better at blocking that stuff. So I'm excited about Nick. I think he's getting guys that are going to have some, like, be part of this like cohesive vision for the offense. I think they really lacked an identity last year at times. And I think that identity that they're going to move forward with is one that can optimize CJ Stroud, get the most out of everyone else, and have answers for just how advanced some of these NFL defenses have gotten.
Yeah, I love to hear that. And, going into the OC search hire, I kind of had two main criteria that I was focused on. And in hindsight, I can admit that it was a bit of an overreaction to reacting to the failures of Bobby Slowick. But the two main boxes for me were experience and wanting to get out of the Shanahan scheme, a spread offense. And, I can admit that maybe the experience part I kind of hyper focused on. It is a gamble. And as far as the scheme goes, too, I admittedly will admit that when I saw these McVay type guys, that I just assumed it was, carte blanche, the same as the Shanahan scheme. So can you kind of, one, just address the experience if you're concerned about that or not? And then two, as far as the scheme goes, how different this scheme is? I know there's been mention of use of motion, 11 personnel, things like that. So how confident are you that those two things will be addressed?
Yeah. So first, let's start with the play caller experience component of this. And I think that's something that fans and analysts alike fixated on, because there was a big learning curve at times with what Bobby Slowick was calling. Some frustrating moments, I think, where it's like, hey, it doesn't have to be this complicated. But at the same time, when you looked at that offense last year, they were insistent on these outside zone runs and kind of running the ball predictably when they would do it, which put them in a lot of bad passing situations. So if your playbook is runs that your offensive personnel is bad at doing, it's hard to call a good run play. And if you're consistently in bad passing scenarios in second and long, third and long, and you can't pass protect because your rules are terrible and every defensive coach knows how to break them, it's hard to call a good pass play. So am I curious to see how Nick Caley does as a first-time offensive coordinator and play caller? Yes, and I don't think that's uncertain. It could go poorly in that aspect, but I don't think that it will, because I think the bones, the foundation of that offense are going to look really strong. And then we pivot to the next thing. People are like, why are we hiring another Bobby Slowick? It's another it's another young guy from this system. And I think there's a number of reasons to look at, but the biggest thing I'd point to is that I don't think those Shanahan guys have done as well as the McVay guys. When you look at Kyle Shanahan, I think a lot of the staples of his 2024 offense are still the staples of like his 2016, 2017 Atlanta Falcons stuff. Like, Kyle Shanahan is the system. He is a genius. Dude is a great coach, like, all these props to him. But I think a lot of people, Mike McDaniel's had some success, but of course he's had Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to play with in Miami. But the other guys, I think they've struggled to innovate off of that very much at times. Garrett, I've made a joke when we were like middle school, high school age, you could download the light version of iPhone games. It was like a different app you could download and it was free. And it would just be like the first 5 minutes of the game. And it so often felt like Bobby Slowick was running 2019, 2020 49ers light. So it's like, okay, I got the game here, but I don't have the full game, and I don't get any of the spinoffs or any of the full version of that Kyle really brings to the table. So this offense, it'll have some similarities. I've got some numbers here. The Rams were under center on 44.6% of their plays. The Patriots, when Cole Popovich was there, were running under center on over 70% of their plays. So I do think this is going to be a lot of under center play. There's a lot of motion. The Rams ran 82% motion last year, but I think that by leaning into, especially, the gap running that we already touched on briefly last year, Kyron Williams, 178 of 351 carries. In 2020, you go back to Damian Harris, over 2/3 of his carries were gap runs. I think that this thing can kind of better integrate those and tie it together with the passing game. And it's less rigid on, we have to be an outside zone team and run play action off of that. I expect them to look for different answers. And also, I think the motion that they bring, McVay was very good at the motion's purposeful. And a lot of the times I was watching what Houston was doing and I'm just asking, why are we doing this right now? So I think there will be some similarities, but also the variability of the scheme. I expect it to be more flexible.
It's going to be exciting as a Texans fan. We're going to see it's going to look completely different. Just watching a lot of the clips that you've posted and other people have posted. I mean, one thing that stands out to me is the motion is he motions receivers and runs them through the C gap either to block or then release. So he's very creative in that regard. Like you would imagine the screen game could be much more evolved, but I can't help but think too, like a lot of these guys that we've looked at last year and based a certain opinion on them based off of the offense they were in last year. I can't help but think how different things can look for certain players. Dalton Schultz comes to mind to me. I mean, he is a player that admittedly had a bad year last year, but you do wonder how much of that was the scheme and putting him in a position that wasn't best setting him up for success. Constantly asking him to block these premier defensive ends. But with that being said, like, do you think guys like Dalton Schultz and even John Mechie like may have been misused in this offense could now become revitalized? Do you see certain personnel within the offense that could thrive on this new system?
Yeah, two different questions there. With Dalton Schultz, I think that Schultz is a good player, but he's limited in what he can do, especially from a blocking capacity. And for a large portion of the season, they favored Cade Stover in those assignments. And I sent multiple, if I index my text message and search George Kittle, I think multiple times this year I texted, I'm tired of seeing Cade Stover being asked to do the George Kittle stuff. Like you said, guys were not necessarily put in a position to succeed in that way. And I do think this is an offense that will be a bit more thoughtful about how those guys are utilized. Mechie's an interesting one. So I actually like his fit in this scheme a lot. This is another offense that, like Bobby Slowick's, you have to block. Especially if you're going to play in the slot, like you have to be able to block. And I think Mechie is an effort player, is a technique player, is willing to do that. What his ceiling is going to be from a usage perspective, I can't quite say. From a talent perspective, I think they need another guy in front of him to be the number two, whether that's bringing back a Stephon Diggs, who suddenly is, I don't know how I feel about that fit. Are you comfortable with Stephon Diggs as a full-time slot player with how he is as a blocker in this scheme, or whether that's taking someone at number 25? But I think that they're going to build this offense around Nico Collins in the passing game. The Rams have been shameless about getting the ball to their top playmakers there, and I'll be curious to see how they do that. I think we could see a lot of Nico Collins in the slot to hunt some mismatches this year.
Well, that brings up another question. Something we've seen and we've heard about Caley and the Rams offense is it seems that Matthew Stafford has much more control at the line of scrimmage. It seems that they allowed the O-line to set the initial protection, but then Stafford has the ability to then, adjust it and also call hot routes. Can you expand on anything you've learned on that? Should we expect CJ Stroud to have more command in this offense?
I mean, I think our best insight into that was, and I would highly recommend it to anyone if you have access to The Athletic. Jordan Rodriguez wrote a great post, I think in November of this past year, so 2 months ago, about Matthew Stafford's responsibilities at the line of scrimmage. And man, I think that's the most exciting part of this offense. And you can even go back as far as to Nick Caley's time with Josh McDaniels and Tom Brady. I think Tom Brady has talked about this when he talks about the state of quarterbacking today, is that I think he's complained that the game is too simple, like too much is taken off of guys' plates. And that was an offense where Tom had a lot of responsibility of what was going to happen when you got to the line of scrimmage, whether that was protections or changing the calls. And I think Sean McVay over the last 3 years, part of why they pivoted to Matthew Stafford is they wanted a guy who they really trusted that, one, could rip every throw, but also kind of take them to the next level. So when I think about, I mean, it's actually my first bullet point. When I think about a Nick Caley offense and what that could be, Bobby was very Shanahan in that he wanted a I point, you shoot guy, and that this play already has the answers. While I think that this offense could maximize CJ Stroud. He's a film junkie. He's a football nerd, and I think everyone loves that about him. It's why I think we had so much fun listening last offseason to him go on the media circuit and just talk about the game, because you can tell he loves football. He does that in his free time. It's a big part of his life beyond just the job. And I think you can capitalize on CJ Stroud, the high IQ film guy, taking advantage of, hey, let him put your offensive line in a good position to change protections. Let him get you into the right play. So yeah, I do expect to see escalated responsibilities from Stroud in this scheme. And frankly, I don't think they would have selected a coach that wasn't prepared to, because I I mean, Stroud's a smart guy. I think that you have to be someone who can command his attention and give him something that he wants to engage with. And I don't think he's here if he's not well positioned to get the best out of number 7.
And that's what's funny to me, the irony of the Shanahan scheme. Like they dumb it down to make it easier for the quarterback, but in doing so, it seems to be counterintuitive. You actually make it harder for the quarterback by
Mhm.
giving them less control. That was my big gripe. But I'm excited about what can happen with this. You alluded to this though. I mean, now that we have the OC in place and he's still building out his staff, we still have a lot of questions, holes to fill. We got basically 2 wide receiver spots to fill. What are some, you alluded to it with Stephon Diggs, what are some moves you expect or want to happen at the wide receiver position?
I'm gonna stay neutral on the Stephon Diggs thing. I'm torn because they obviously have a huge financial commitment. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, but I think it's 16 million dead cap if they do not re-sign him by February 16th, or it might be the 17th. But so there's some real financial incentive to get him back on the books. But also, does that player fit with what we've traditionally see from these from the McVay offense, from the Shanahan offense? They want a guy that can block there. And so I don't know. It depends on what do you think of Stephon Diggs as a perimeter player? Are you comfortable with him maybe in a reduced role? He's not coming out there if you're in 12 or 21 personnel. And then that extends into the draft with what do you want to do for a number 2 like for the number 2 wide receiver if it's not him? I think everyone this week was, could they go get a guy like Cooper Kupp? Of course, that would fit, but that would be expensive. And then you look towards the draft, there's some really fun fits. I think there should be plenty of conversation about Emeka Egbuka could come in and perfectly kind of be that move receiver who's willing to do the dirty work. And he did it for Ohio State all the time this year. He wasn't their featured guy, but hey, he put in the work and he got a lot of looks his way because of that. So that's something I'm curious about. And then can I go into the O line a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free.
Yeah. Then my only other thing is I think you can't revamp the entire offensive line. So something I expect is I think you're going to get at least one new offensive lineman who has either the capital or the money allocation that he's an automatic starter. Because the way I'm seeing in my head right now, Laramie Tunsil, that's set. You're going to pay him. Frankly, I would extend him or restructure to try to get that cap hit down. You need the salary cap space while Stroud is cheap. And then Blake Fisher is a top 60 pick under this regime. He's going to play somewhere. So can Cole Popovich and Nick Caley rescue 2 of Shaq Mason, Titus Howard, Jarrett Patterson, Juice Scruggs, Kenyon Green, just 2 of them so that you can play and then find one guy who maybe anchors in one of the right spots that it lets everyone else play a little easier. So I'm curious about that. And then, I mean, the fun part about a new staff, you never know what to expect and what vision they might have for this.
Yeah, O-line is interesting. I feel like we as a fan base kind of over criticize them. Like I get like, mid to mid late in the year it was pretty bad, but we again have to remember that how much of this may have been the scheme from Bobby Slowick. I mean, everything that we've all pointed out, especially in pass pro, seems to be not really a physical deficiency, but rather a mental one, which points to scheme and or coaching. So I think it's not as bad as we think. I think really just the right guard position at the very worst, if you address that, it could be a lot better. And then as to your point earlier in the run game, if we adapt to our personnel, which Slowick did not do, and run more gap scheme, which seems to suit our personnel, that can also trickle down to the pass game, like you said, being in better situations. So I'm more optimistic about the O-line than others. I don't think it's as
Yeah.
dire. Hopefully it's just one thing, but there's definitely moves. It seems like Shaq Mason. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Shaq Mason? Do you think that's an auto cut, or should we try and resurrect him? Or
I imagine he's probably out the door just because you've got guys that are young and cheap that you're probably just as between Patterson and Scruggs. I think guys you're comfortable playing that would give you the same level of production he gave you through the year. But I don't know. This is Casario has been loyal to some of these older players at times, and he is expensive. I would lean towards they'll take the cap savings though. What do you think?
I think so too. I guess before, that line of thinking, like you said, the loyalty, I would have thought, oh, they're not going to do it. But, once they fired Slowick, once D'Amico fired Slowick, not only was I happy about the new OC coming in, I was happy about what it signaled that D'Amico is, he's greedy. He wants to make that next step. So I, had made this judgment that he was too loyal to players and this and that. So my immediate thought was, okay, who's next? So, I mean, I think Shaq is gone, and I think Schultz might be a potential casualty as well. But we'll kind of transition in. We got about 10 more minutes here before I got to run, but I'd like to get your insight. As you mentioned, you've been to the Senior Bowl for 3 or 4 years. I had talked with you prior to that, and I tried to make a last-minute decision to go. Booked a flight, came home, had my wife check me in, and then she notified me that I booked a flight for the month after. So unfortunately, I didn't make it. I will plan ahead next year and join you. But with that being said, who are some guys that stood out to you at the Senior Bowl, and some names that we might see the Texans draft later this spring?
Yeah, one moment. I'm pulling this. Okay.
Oh, you got the whole spreadsheet. I love it.
I was honestly, I'm just pulling up my article. I would definitely recommend, if you guys are interested in my Senior Bowl takeaways, please go to TexansWire.usatoday.com. I wrote up kind of 5 big points that I would point to about the Senior Bowl. Just want to make sure I get names right. I mean, of course, I think maybe the biggest winner from the Senior Bowl was Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. It was really fun sitting with Stutz, and we were just amazed at watching him. He'd shift from every play. He'd maybe do 3 plays at left guard, 4 plays at center, 3 plays at right guard. And that is a guy that, I mean, he doesn't fit the profile of a Nick Caserio first-round pick, but if there was ever a time to make an exception, you could take him and figure out which spot you know that, hey, see where the other guys work best and trust that he will be the best of your entire interior at any of those 3 spots. And you could set it and forget it. So I love that. I do think Jalen Rivers from Miami. I mean, the offensive line as a whole had an up and down week. The Senior Bowl's just as an event, it's built for, I think, defensive line has an easier time than the offensive line. And then, of course, wide receivers in these one-on-one drills have an advantage over the defensive backs. But I think he'd be a neat fit. Something that I've kind of planted in my head, another name I'll throw out, running back Trevor Etienne from Georgia. He played at Florida previously. He had an awesome week. And I think right now the Texans, as you look at, even as we adapt that running scheme, I think it'll complement Dameon Pierce very well. And I trust Joe Mixon to do well as well in any scheme shift. But neither of those guys were ever trusted this past year to pass block. And I thought that was telling, that when it came time to pass block, number 33, Daria came out there to pass block if they needed someone to do it. If Joe Mixon was in the game on 3rd down, he was releasing one way or another. So could you bring in a natural 3rd down complement, a bit more of a home run hitter with Etienne's running style? I'd be interested to see it. Jack Beck from wide receiver TCU is a name I would expect to hear a lot. He kind of fits that, as we've talked about during this past half hour. That blocking persona can move around the formation. And then finally, I also give 3 names. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. He'd be a 1st-round guy. I don't think he'll make it there, but he'd be a great 3 tech. Deone Walker from Kentucky. He could play
Big
1
dude.
or the
That guy's
3.
massive.
Yeah, he's huge. And then in that note too, Darius Alexander from Toledo. And I talked to him. He met with the Texans. Sounded like it was a really fun visit. But if there's some great interior trenches help at the Senior Bowl that was on display.
Yeah, I guess to kind of elaborate on that, how would you prioritize our positions of need? Which ones would be in any order? And then I guess based off that also too, previewing the draft, what are the most, stacked positions, so that can kind of help us formulate what we might get?
Are we talking from positions of need, thinking about the draft, or thinking about just the entire offseason?
Yeah, because it's tough. People ask these questions all the time, but before free agency, you really can't just say who you're going to draft. But just say,
Exactly.
I would just say overall, currently that could project into the draft, and then on the back end of that, also say which positions are the most stacked in terms of depth.
I want a force multiplier for the defense in the top 60 of the draft, but that's probably it. I think it has to come below. You need a new interior offensive lineman. You need at least 1. You can probably talk yourself into getting 2. I think that's the biggest area of need. And then you do need a wide receiver too, just to take some of the pressure off of Nico Collins. I think Nico Collins is elite. He's top 5 in my book. But if you can build the offense that he doesn't have to constantly carry that load, I'd be looking at number 2 wide receiver. And I think we're going to learn a lot about who they want to be on offense based on what archetype of player they chase there. Because, for an example, if they went and took Matthew Golden from Texas, a bit of a burner, kind of in that Jameson Williams mold when you think about the Detroit Lions, that would tell me a very different picture than Ibuka from Ohio State, I love him. He's not that spread the field guy. So I'll be curious what archetype of player they chase there. And those are probably my top two positions.
And are there any positions that you've learned from, your draft research that you feel like have more depth? So like when I look at that, like I think initially like the D line group is stacked and the tight end group is stacked. Like my perception is when I hear that is okay, you can get greedy and now draft those in later positions. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I think this draft, running back, tight end, defensive tackle, absolutely loaded. If you want to grab a guy on day three, especially a running back and tight end, you're probably going to be able to get a contributor. I don't know how the Texans view their position group right now because it looks like you're probably set at tight end between Dalton, Cade Stover, Brevin Jordan. But if you want to add a guy to that equation, you can get a really solid player on day three. Ditto at running back. Interior defensive line, it's awesome because there might be a guy that you're jumping to take at 25, like Nolan from Ole Miss, and I wouldn't blame you for a second. But if you want to wait for the next round and get a Walker or Darius Alexander, like you're getting a guy who can do a lot for you still. So those are probably the three positions of need, and I think it maybe makes you feel better about, hey, we really want to prioritize maybe offensive line or wide receiver in round one. Okay, those positions will be there the next day on the draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I feel pretty good because a lot of the depth positions seem to be positions of need for us as well. So I think that kind of plays to our advantage. But like we've mentioned, it's early. There's still plenty of holes to fill. But regardless, with the new OC, I think one thing to point out is, like you mentioned, I mean, we're trying to figure out which direction he'll go. Like there's this element of like mystery. Like we don't know exactly what this offense will be. But, if he is the guy that we believe he is in the sense that he's more adaptable, which Bobby Slowick wasn't, he could basically make anything shake. So it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like he can kind of mold it however he wants. So to me, that's exciting. But I guess the question I would have, though, like tight end, I mean, if you have someone like Tyler Warren or ability to upgrade, like as you mentioned, the tight end room is stacked. I mean, it's tough when you already have guys, but if someone like that comes available, would you want them to take that player and then as a result, have to cut a Schultz or somebody as a result?
I mean, if Tyler Warren makes it, I don't think he's getting out of the top 15. If that guy makes it to 25, I think you can run that card to the podium. Yeah, I'd have no problem taking a tight end in the top 60 that might feel like, hey, is this a guy? Do we need to spend day one, day two draft capital here? No, but I don't think that should prohibit you because, frankly, this offense needs more game changers. I think you've got the game changing, elevating quarterback in CJ Stroud. You've got the elite wide receiver. You've got an elite running back, but just some guys who can take advantage of the gravity of Nico Collins, of Joe Mixon. You need more of that. So whether that's at running back, I mean, like we just talked about, our running back depth's pretty great, and I think Joe Mixon's a high volume guy, but I'd have no problem with a Trevor Etienne because you can get another player into the passing equation. And I feel the same way about tight end. So it's a unique spot because you're win now, but the roster is good enough. I think that you got to go best player available and get dudes in the building and then build it out from there.
It's a great spot to be in. I mean, you look at last year, like it was one of the most exciting off seasons, but it was like that because we had a lot of holes to fill. Whereas this year, it's the third year going into this, window of competition. So I'm excited. I trust what they do. I think that's the one thing is, it's fun for us fans to speculate to get this coach, to get that player. But in the end, what I tell myself is I trust Nick and D'Amico. So as much as you can, become infatuated with the player, I still trust that they obviously will make the correct decision. John, it's
Yeah.
been great. Before we go, would you like to add anything about any things you got going on? And then I will also say something I would like to do. I think it would be great if we did this again with some like film analysis. I know you and Jordan may have done some stuff like that, but I think that would be good to kind of like overlay stuff and kind of have you kind of walk through stuff. But
Yeah, man.
anyways, we can
You
talk
tell
about
me what
that.
we want to talk about, and I clip up film pretty frequently. Usually, I'm throwing it on the timeline, but would be happy to bring some of that to the stream next time. While I mention it, yeah, all my work can be found on the Texans Wire, guys. I write there, texanswire.usatoday.com, and if you want to see any of this film that we reference, that's going to be at John Crumpler MD on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, I think the film idea would be a great one. We'll have to work on that. I feel like we could learn from our guests and they could learn from you as well. But It's definitely exciting times. I am 1,000% on board with Nick Caley. I appreciate your hard work and the insight you've provided. Appreciate you guys tuning in. And, as always, you can follow me on social media, check out the website, subscribe to the newsletter. But if you don't, follow John and support him and check out his articles. He does a lot of great work. So